My name is Sophia Grant. I am 28 years old. I live in Boston, Massachusetts. I work in finance, the kind of job that rewards patience, silence, and the ability to wait for other people to make mistakes. I have lived this life 3 times already. In my first life, I fought. In my second life, I begged. In both lives, I lost everything that mattered to me. This is my third life, and this time I chose to sit still and watch. When people hear that someone has been given a second chance at life, they imagine revenge that is loud and dramatic. They imagine screaming, confrontation, and finally winning back what was stolen. I used to imagine that too. I thought if I just tried harder, loved louder, proved myself more clearly, my family would finally see me. They never did. The moment everything began to fall apart was the same in all 3 lives. I was 8 years old. It was the day Emily Grant came to live with us. Emily was my mother's sister's daughter, an orphan after a tragic accident, a fragile child with a congenital heart condition that made adults soften the moment they looked at her. I remember standing in the living room, my feet barely touching the floor, watching my mother cradle Emily in her arms as if she had always belonged there. My father cleared his throat and said, slowly and carefully, as if choosing words that would define the rest of my childhood, Sophia, Emily has a heart condition. You are the older sister. You need to be more understanding. I was older by 1 month. That fact never mattered. From that moment on, everything in our house came with an invisible condition attached to it. If Emily was tired, plans changed. If Emily was scared, voices softened. If Emily felt unwell, everyone else disappeared. They told me they loved us equally. They truly believed it. But love, I learned early, is not measured by what people say. It is measured by who they run to first and who they leave behind without noticing. In my first life, I hated Emily. I sabotaged her, argued with my parents, screamed until my throat burned, and starved myself in protest. Every tear I shed only made them hold her tighter. In my second life, I tried to be perfect, quiet, accomplished, reasonable. I swallowed every slight and told myself that if I endured long enough, they would choose me again. They did not. So when I opened my eyes for the third time and found myself back in that living room, watching my mother hold Emily, I felt something new. Not anger, not jealousy, not pain, clarity. I realized that love that has to be shared under pressure is not love at all. It is a transaction. And I was done paying for something that never belonged to me in the first place. This time, I did not fight. I did not cry. I did not ask to be chosen. I watched. I waited. And I let everything unfold exactly as it always did. Because this time, I knew who would truly lose in the end. Emily arrived with a small pink suitcase and a plastic bracelet from the hospital. I watched from the staircase while my mother smoothed her hair and called her sweetheart. My father carried the suitcase like it weighed nothing, like he had been waiting for this rescue mission his whole life. Daniel leaned close to Emily and made her laugh with a silly face. I stood there, one step higher, feeling my chest tighten as if the air had turned thick. No one asked if I was afraid. They only asked if I was kind and share my room tonight too. The rules formed fast. If Emily coughed, the television went quiet. If she looked pale, my homework had to wait because everyone gathered around the kitchen table like a medical council. My mother kept a pill organizer beside the salt and pepper. My father memorized the cardiologist's name the way other dads memorize sports stats. Every time I complained, even about something small like a missing crayon, Margaret touched my shoulder and reminded me I was blessed. Blessed meant I should not need anything. Blessed meant Emily did. I learned to swallow until they tasted like pennies under my tongue. I started hiding in my room, not to sulk, but to build a wall of textbooks. I was 8, yet I remembered calculus formulas from another lifetime like they were nursery rhymes. Robert knocked and asked me to come downstairs and play board games with my new sister. I said no. A few minutes later, Emily appeared in the hallway, voice soft, asking if I hated her. Daniel scolded me through the door, calling me selfish. I pressed my nails into my palm and kept my voice flat. Please leave me alone. Silence felt safer than love there every day. Then my birthday arrived, the first big test. In my memory, I saw the same bright entrance, the same giant cartoon animals, the same forced smiles. Margaret promised we would spend the whole day at the amusement park, just like we had before Emily. I let myself hope for 10 minutes. I even wore a headband with rabbit ears because I wanted to feel like a kid again. We walked through the gates, and before I could choose a ride, Emily clutched her chest. Her knees buckled. Robert caught her and shouted for the car. Daniel ran, dialing for help. People stared like we were a tragedy on display. Margaret turned to me with the tight expression she used when she needed obedience. She said she was sorry, that Emily's condition was special, that we would come back another time. Her hand reached for mine, but her eyes were already on Emily. Robert lifted Emily into his arms and rushed toward the exit. Daniel followed, face pale with worry. I told myself I would not beg. I did not. I watched them disappear. Then I walked to the curb, dropped my headband in the dust, and took a taxi alone. I sat on the living room sofa until the window turned from blue to black. The house smelled of cleaner and quiet. Missus. Wilson moved through the rooms with careful steps, like she was afraid to disturb something fragile. She asked if I wanted dinner. In my first life, I threw plates. In my second life, I cried until I fell asleep. In this life, I nodded and ate a few bites, tasting nothing. Mrs. Wilson placed a cupcake with one candle on the table. She whispered birthday, then left. I kept my face blank still. Nobody came back that night. They returned the next afternoon with hospital papers and bags of takeout, like proof they had tried. Emily lay on the couch under a blanket while my parents hovered. Daniel watched me with a hard stare. Robert began an explanation, saying they did not mean to leave me, saying Emily needed them. I finished it for him. Emily has a heart condition. He blinked, then nodded. Margaret promised to make it up to me and said we would go to park later. I smiled without warmth. I went upstairs and locked my door, hands shaking. After that, the house settled into a calm that felt fake, like a smile held too long. My parents stopped knocking. Emily stopped trying to charm me and turned her attention to them instead. She laughed at Daniel's jokes, sat beside Margaret during movies, and curled against Robert when her pulse monitor beeped. They looked like a family of 4, and I became the empty chair. I did not interrupt. I studied. I learned to measure affection the way I measured numbers, by what people invested and what they withdrew. Emily kept taking. They kept giving. I started planning exit. At dinner, my place stayed at the same end of the table, but the spotlight moved. Emily told stories about the orphanage, carefully chosen to make Margaret's eyes shine with tears. Robert praised her for being brave. Daniel slipped food onto her plate and asked if she was tired. When I reached for the bread basket, nobody noticed. When I answered a question in school the next day and my teacher wrote a gold star on my paper, I brought it home and left it on the counter. It sat there until Mrs. Wilson tossed it with the junk mail. That night I lay in bed listening to the house breathe. Down the hall, Emily coughed, and my parents hurried to her room. The sound did not surprise me anymore. I rolled over and opened a math workbook hidden under my pillow. In another life, I wasted years trying to win a competition that had no rules and no referee. This time I chose a game that did. Numbers never favored the sickest child. They favored the one who did the work. I traced each problem and promised myself I would be untouchable one day, with my name on everything. School became the only place where rules stayed consistent. Answers were either right or wrong. Effort showed up in results. I leaned into that certainty and let it carry me. By the end of elementary school, teachers called my parents with praise. Margaret listened politely, then glanced at Emily to make sure she was not overwhelmed by the conversation. Robert thanked them and said I had always been quick with numbers. Daniel shrugged like it was nothing special. When Emily brought home an average report card, the house filled with encouragement, charts on the fridge, promises of rewards for trying. When I placed first in the district exam, the paper stayed folded in my bag. Emily cried easily. She learned how to do it quietly at first, then with small sobs that pulled adults closer. When she failed a quiz, she collapsed into Margaret's arms and whispered that she was stupid. Margaret rushed to deny it, kissing her hair, blaming the school, blaming pressure. Robert agreed and said health came first. Daniel offered to tutor her. No one asked how I studied. No one asked what it cost me to stay ahead, while living in a house that pretended I did not exist unless I was being corrected. At 13, I skipped 3 grades. The principal praised my discipline. My parents attended the meeting with careful smiles. In the car, Margaret said I should not flaunt it in front of Emily. Robert said being humble would keep peace at home. Daniel joked that I was weird anyway. I stared out the window and memorized the route, counting turns, promising myself I would drive it alone one day and never come back. My engagement was announced when I was 16. Ethan Cole shook my hand like a business deal and kissed my cheek like a courtesy. I felt nothing. It was arranged, convenient, and acceptable. Emily sat beside him at dinners, laughing too loudly, asking questions about his work, praising his taste in music. I noticed the way his eyes followed her, the way he leaned closer. In my first life, I confronted them and burned everything down. In my second life, I tried to be more desirable, more patient, more forgiving. In this life, I took notes. My allergy to mangoes was not a secret. When I was 3, I spent days in a hospital bed after one bite. It became a story Margaret told guests, laughing nervously about fear. Somehow, when Emily baked my birthday cake years later, mango slices appeared folded into the cream. Emily apologized with tears, saying she did not know. Margaret scolded me gently for not just scraping them off. Daniel snapped that I was ruining the moment. Ethan watched, silent. I pushed the plate away and said nothing. That night, my throat itched and my chest felt tight, and I sat alone in my room with antihistamines, listening to laughter downstairs. Lucas Wright came back into my life like a quiet correction. He had always been there, technically, a neighbor kid who argued with me over trivial things. He returned after years away and found me studying in the library while the rest of the house hosted a party for Emily. He asked why I was not downstairs. I said I did not feel like pretending. He nodded like that answer made sense. He brought me coffee and asked about my plans. When I spoke, he listened. When I stopped, he waited. It felt strange, being treated like I mattered without earning it. I moved into his class after another acceleration. Emily tried to follow and burned herself out. Margaret begged me to slow down so Emily would not feel pressured. Robert said health was more important than grades. I agreed and kept going. I stopped attending family dinners. I ate in my room or stayed late at school. The house adjusted, grateful for the calm my absence created. My 18th birthday arrived with promises of a grand celebration. I knew the pattern. When Emily clutched her chest halfway through the ceremony and everyone rushed to her side, I did not freeze. I finished greeting guests, answered questions, smiled when necessary. Ethan disappeared toward the hospital with her. Margaret did not meet my eyes. Robert said we would talk later. I signed the paperwork I had prepared and slipped it into my bag. Later that night, I handed them the agreement. I returned the money they tracked so carefully. I thanked them for raising me and told them I was done. Margaret cried. Robert Argad. Daniel accused me of being dramatic. Emily hid behind a blanket, watching. I left without shouting. Lucas waited outside and drove me away. The city lights blurred, and for the first time, the silence felt earned. Years passed. I built a career that rewarded foresight. I bought companies quietly. Ethan married Emily with smiles and cameras. Their fortunes slid as mine grew. Rumors planted themselves and sprouted on their own. Emily's health worsened under stress. Ethan's patience thinned. Margaret called once, then stopped. Robert sent messages that sounded like regrets written by lawyers. When Emily lay in a hospital bed years later, alone and afraid, I visited once. She admitted what she wanted, what she took. I listened without anger. When she died, I felt relief, not triumph. Outside, Lucas waited with flowers and a ring. I said yes, because this time, the choice was mine. The last thread tying me to the grand house snapped quietly, the way most important things do. There was no dramatic announcement, no final argument that ended with doors slamming. It happened through paperwork, signatures, and the simple act of choosing not to return calls. I had learned that distance was the only boundary my family respected. The coming-of-age ceremony was supposed to be my final performance as their daughter. Margaret planned every detail with precision, right down to the seating order that placed Emily front and center. I arrived on time. dressed appropriately. Calm, I greeted guests with a practiced smile. When Emily complained of chest pain right on schedule, the room tilted toward her like a sunflower chasing light. Doctors were called. Ethan hovered. Daniel paced. Margaret cried. Robert issued instructions. I stood still and watched the pattern complete itself, just as it always had. When they rushed Emily out, leaving me to face the whispers, I did not panic. I did not chase after them. I thanked the guests for coming and closed the evening myself. People looked surprised. Some looked impressed. I felt nothing at all. I went home, opened my bag, and placed the documents on the dining table where Margaret would find them later. I left before anyone returned. Emily's marriage was loud and expensive. Cameras flashed. Promises were made. I did not attend. I watched the coverage with the same detachment I used for market reports. Ethan's business faltered soon after. Deals failed. Partnerships dissolved. Emily's health declined under the pressure of being admired and resented at the same time. Margaret tried to intervene and learned how little power she had outside her own house. Daniel grew bitter and distant. Robert aged quickly. I did not engineer their downfall with cruelty. I simply stopped protecting them from consequences. The companies I acquired were public knowledge. The rumors did the rest. When Emily was left with nothing but debt and hospital bills, I visited once. She asked me if I hated her. I told her the truth. I did not need to hate her anymore. She closed her eyes and cried softly, the way she always had. This time no one came running. Her death came on a quiet morning. I sent flowers. I did not attend the funeral. Margaret wrote a letter filled with regret and explanations. I did not reply. Robert transferred assets in an attempt to make amends. I returned them. I had no interest in inheriting a story that never included me. Lucas proposed on an ordinary evening, without an audience. He said my name like it mattered. I said yes because it felt right, not because it was expected. We built a life that was steady and kind. When people ask about my family, I answer briefly and change the subject. I did not win by taking everything from them. I won by walking away and discovering how light I could feel without their love weighing me down. The world did not explode after I walked away. It did not collapse either. It simply continued, quietly, indifferently, the way it always does when you stop begging it to notice your pain. After Emily died, there was a strange pause in the Grant family, like a stage after the curtains have fallen but the actors are still standing there, unsure where to go next. Without her illness to orbit around, my parents seemed smaller. Margaret aged overnight. Robert stopped pretending he understood what went wrong. Daniel avoided mirrors because they reminded him of choices he never questioned. They tried, in their own clumsy way, to reach me again. A text on my birthday. A voicemail filled with apologies that came years too late. A transfer of assets labeled as compensation, as if love could be balanced on a spreadsheet. I rejected all of it. I did not do it out of spite. I did it because I finally understood something that had taken me 3 lifetimes to learn. You cannot heal inside the place that taught you to bleed. You cannot rebuild yourself with the same hands that broke you. People love to talk about forgiveness as if it is a moral obligation. They never talk about self-respect with the same reverence. They never say that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is accept that someone was never capable of loving you the way you deserved, and stop waiting for them to change. Lucas never asked me to reconcile. He never pushed me to call them back. He treated my past like a closed chapter, not a wound he needed to inspect. We built a life made of small certainties. Morning coffee, shared calendars, silence that felt safe instead of heavy. On quiet nights, I sometimes thought about the little girl I used to be, the one who stood on the staircase, watching her family turn toward someone else. I wished I could tell her that she was not difficult. She was not selfish. She was not unlovable. She was simply surrounded by people who mistook pity for virtue and sacrifice for fairness. Emily spent her life taking what she thought she needed to survive. My parents spent theirs convincing themselves they were just being kind. Daniel spent his choosing the easier side. In the end, none of them won. I did not win either. I survived, and that was enough. If there is one thing I know now, it is this. You do not owe your future to people who only loved you conditionally. You do not owe loyalty to a family that only valued you when you stayed quiet. And you do not need to burn a house down to prove you were hurt in it. Sometimes, the most devastating revenge is living well, far away, and never looking back. That is how my story ends.